Hi everyone. I thought I'd come on a few minutes early, just to sort my hair out, just to have a quick chat about philosophy. What a shocker. Wasn't best pleased with the philosophy paper. But it's OCR for you, which is why tonight we have to really be prepared that OCR could ask anything. The philosophy paper really lulled us into a well, me certainly. Obviously, I only judge OCR based on their patterns, and they broke two big patterns that they've never done in the last 8, 9 years, which is ask the same topic 3 years running. The religious experience question, in my mind, was just lazy. It was very similar to last year's question on union, mysticism. Sorry, mysticism is union, and it was very similar to the 2023 first year question. So it was just a lazy question. I don't think it was necessary. It wasn't the religious experience one. It was doable. There wasn't anything particularly tricky about it. It was just the fact that it's just really boring to see religious experience again. Falsification, total shocker. Wasn't expecting that over nature of God. Yeah, seems to have just forgotten about nature of God now. And then obviously, they've never before asked a question from the first year in the same year as the second year. So obviously they asked materialism in the first year. I was expecting materialism question. I did not then think it would then come up in your exam, which it did do. Obviously, the thing that threw a lot of you off was the word consciousness. Unfortunately, I was getting my typing fingers ready to write to the exam board, and I checked the specification, and of course the word is there. If you go through the spec, the word consciousness is mentioned at least twice. So my advice for you guys going forward, either tonight or tomorrow morning before your exam, go to the OCR website, just type in religious studies specification OCR. You'll see a document, download it, read through the ethics carefully. Make sure there's no words in there that are going to catch you out tomorrow, especially if OCR fancy doing another tricky worded paper, because the paper itself wasn't that hard. The wording wasn't nice, and obviously 4 topics that students generally don't like. Students do not notoriously like religious experience. They don't like religious language. They don't like ontological because it's quite hard. It's hard to get your head around. And then students do not like body, mind, and soul. So the fact that they asked 4 topics, teleological's easy, cosmological's easy. Students don't mind problem of evil. The fact that they asked them for students like Plato and Aristotle, it was quite a mean paper. So we need to be expectant that they might do something totally unusual as well in this exam tomorrow. Oh, thank you, Sophie. That's very kind. Yeah, let's hope it goes well. Yeah, that's the problem, Jimmy. I know you lot have so many exams, so much information. This is the government. We won't go down politics, but this is the government idea of linear exams, all at the end of 2 years. Everything's on these exams. It's so much pressure. It's so much work. Your brain has to remember so much information. It's very, very hard. Very hard. Yeah, consciousness, Sophia, I agree. I think consciousness threw a lot of people off. I also think some people got the word confused with conscience. So I do think the philosophy paper definitely opens up some big areas that students could have maybe made mistakes, some potholes, but it's done onwards and upwards to ethics. Yeah, Grace, I think conscience will maybe come up tomorrow. Yeah, Sam, I think that's a really good point, is that the harder questions do challenge you more. You have to really think about them. And when it's a harder question, you really focus on answering that question and arguing it. So actually harder questions do make students perform better usually. So it's a really good point, is that, Sam? You are funny. Rosie, I haven't come across that case, but I imagine if it's to do with that isn't the Adriana Smith. That's not the lady that's been kept alive for the baby, is it? Is that the same one? I know. I think she's some state like Georgia, but I didn't think might be that one. Yeah, no, I wouldn't. A student of mine asked that question. They're not keeping her alive. They're keeping her alive because of the fetus, which is against abortion. It's not because they're against euthanasia. Otherwise, they'd keep everybody alive. So it's not a case for euthanasia. It's a fascinating and frightening case, but I think it would take you a bit down a tangent down the abortion route rather than a euthanasia route. So personally, I wouldn't, even though it would be a great one to talk about in your essays. Yep, fine, absolutely no problem doing how to structure an application essay. I've been asked that a few times. Right, let's stop waffling then. Let's leave philosophy in the past. It's done, it's over, you did your best. It's 3 of 9 essays. Let's get tomorrow smashed. Let's do tomorrow. So my original, if you just want to hold off from your questions for a second, because I don't want to miss your questions and your points, but I won't be able to answer them immediately. So tomorrow, my predictions are as follows. I think that you're going to get a situation ethics topic. I think it might be situation ethics, maybe with euthanasia. You might get situation ethics on its own. You might get euthanasia on its own. So I think it's going to be around them two more likely. Utilitarianism. Someone made a really good comment earlier that utilitarianism has been on I think every exam for the last 3 years, but it's always been in relation to another theory. Utilitarianism is the only topic to never have a question. So like natural law, for example, is at the 40 years of law. That was specifically on natural law. There's never been a question on Mill, never been a question on Bentham, never been a question on focusing on pleasure or happiness, never been a question on act versus rule. So I think that that's a possibility. Just because business has been on previously, we cannot sit back now and think business won't come up, because again, if religious experience has taught us anything, they might ask you something on maybe corporate social responsibility for business. Also, natural law and Kant might still come up. I think Kant and sex is very likely. Kant is the only normative theory that's never been asked for sexual ethics. So I think Kant's one that you need to learn. For me, because there's fewer ethics topics, I would go over all of them just in case. Now, between meta and conscience, I think sex ethics is definitely going to be on there. I would pick sex ethics and euthanasia. You're pretty much guaranteed to get 2 application. Most years they ask at least 2 application. They might ask 1 if you're lucky. But usually they ask 2, so you have to do at least 1 application question. If it's between meta and conscience, I would say conscience, but going by, again, there are patterns, it might be meta ethics. Prepare for meta ethics. If it is, I think it's going to be down an intuitionist route, or a very general ethics question again, meta ethics question. I can go over meta ethics with you, though. That is absolutely fine. Conscience for me is a more obvious one, because there's never been a question on guilt. There's never been a question on the umbrella term of conscience. So I think conscience is more likely. And as I said, I think sex ethics is going to be there. So there's a lot less for you to play around with, but the thing with ethics is the ethics topics are easier. Kant is easy. Natural law is easy. These topics are easy. The technique for application is tricky. So I will go over how I advise to structure it, but obviously you'll have your own techniques that you've been practicing as well. So let me just see what sorts of questions you're coming up with, and then we'll break it down. Says, what's Alfie asking me? Whether universe can have telos. Does it actually say that, Alfie, in the spec about the universe having telos? Because someone else has asked me that question, but it was about Aristotle's influence of the idea of telos, the idea of universe and telos. That's very cosmological. I don't have let me just Let me just do what I've told you all to do. Religious studies specification. I'll come back to that one, Alfie. I'm just downloading the spec now. I'm just downloading the spec, so I'll have a look. What was the highest mark an examiner can give if I argued for Anselm, but it wasn't long enough? It depends purely on it, the quality of what you wrote. It's not always about how long your answers are. Yeah, that's a great question, Sophie. I'll come back to that one. Yeah, these questions are fabulous. Right, let me just check Alfie's question first. I'm just on the spec now on my thing. I'm just going down to natural law. Natural law, Aquinas' natural law, telos, origins of the specific significant concept of telos in Aristotle and religious developments of the writing of Aquinas, proofful method, judgment good, whether or not the universe as a whole, very clever, Alfie, whether or not the universe as a whole is designed with a telos or human nature towards goodness. Very well spotted there, Alfie, then. So this idea of telos, does the universe have telos? It's still this idea of, is there a purpose? And obviously Aquinas argues that we are naturally inclined towards goodness. Don't forget, Aquinas' ultimate telos for humans is the idea of achieving godlike perfection. So within the idea of our existence within the universe, that's how I would still go. I'd still go down it as a telos question, rather than they're still wanting this idea of do we have a purpose and a telos? Does the universe have a purpose and telos? And obviously Aquinas believes that we are naturally inclined towards goodness, which is where the ethical link comes from. But yeah, very well spotted. That would be a bit tricky with that if that came up. So to go back to Sophie's question, if a question focuses on one theory, natural law, how much should you reference another ethical theory? I get this question asked a lot. Personally, I wouldn't. This is something that students do, and I don't quite know why. Then this is just my advice. If a question asks you for a theory, talk about that theory. You will have studied these theories for 1, 2, 3 weeks. Don't bring in another theory. So if it talks about natural law's approach to moral decision making, which is obviously natural law with euthanasia, you're then juggling 2 topics already. You're juggling natural law and how it applies to euthanasia. I would not dream myself of bringing in situation ethics. Why bring a 3rd topic in? That's like 6 weeks worth of work. That's like 50 odd PowerPoint slides. No, unless it actually wants you to compare, or sometimes if it says it is the best approach, you could then compare it to a theory that is better or worse. But even then, if you get natural law is the best approach to it, you can still get full marks by just evaluating whether natural law is or is not the best. So personally, if it does not actually mention another theory in the question, I personally wouldn't talk about another theory. Ethics is hard enough juggling the application with the normative ethic. I wouldn't necessarily compare it. If you do compare it, you compare it as an afterthought, as part of your evaluation. You do it briefly. You don't do any full paragraphs on another theory. That's certainly how I would approach it. If we get a question about the effectiveness of a specific ethical theory, do we need to compare? So yeah, like I said, you don't have to compare. You could do the effectiveness just on its own. If you feel more confident saying why something is or is not effective by doing a comparison, do the comparison quickly, because you're only doing it in relation to the theory that you're talking about. You don't have to then go into great depth about the other theory. I'd highly advise you don't go into great depth about another theory. Do it as just like you would about another name or another point. You do it quickly in relation to what is being asked in the question. How do you spread Kantian ethics on sexual ethics to 3 points? Do you mean what would your main paragraphs be? Obviously, with Kant, you've got lots of different themes. You could do goodwill, you could do duty, you could do categorical imperative universalizability, categorical imperative means to an ends. So I don't know if you mean how would you link Kant to homosexuality and the 3 themes there? I'm not sure if that's what you meant instead. Casuistry, Sabina, is just the application of ethics. It's just the process of thinking through and actually acting upon what you think is right and wrong. So casuistry is just the process of looking to what something's telos is and applying that in your ethics. So it's just about looking at situations and applying real goods, applying the right reason, your rector ratio links with conscience, etc. So it's about applying ethics in the right way. That's all casuistry is. Yeah, Dawkins and evolution, Jimmy, would work well. That's fine. Yes, so great, Ava. Thank you for your question there. And this has never been done before, which is why it's a big possibility. Be prepared. They might ask you a question that is specifically themed on an issue in sex ethics. Same with euthanasia or business. Business, they might ask corporate social responsibility. That might be the question about that, or whistleblowing. Euthanasia might be about sanctity of life or quality of life, or about I can't remember what the word is, passive intervention or whatever it is. It was one of the predictions that I said. So the same with sex ethics. They could ask, critically assess the view that no theory works when dealing with issues surrounding homosexuality. Obviously, the only questions they will ask you on is homosexuality, premarital sex, and extramarital sex. Those are the only three areas they will ask you on, but they could just have that in the question. They might not ask for any theory. You can then pick. You then pick which theory you want to apply, or which theories you want to apply, if more than one. I highly advise you as well tonight or tomorrow morning to see what's going on in the world. Know some actual case studies, know some actual statistics, know some things that are actually going on. Don't just talk about homosexuality as a very broad term. Actually give me specifics. So that's a good thing that's quite an easy thing to check up. So even if you just go on BBC News, see what's going on in the world. Yeah, this will be posted afterwards, so you can go back. That would be very clever, Nick. The idea of applying intuitionism against Kant, yeah, that would work. That would work nicely. You can always overlap these different arguments. Don't forget, intuitionism is about what the words mean. So if you're criticizing Kant's application of what the words mean to ethics, then yes, that works really well. No theories work with the issue with homosexuality. Is it valid to criticize natural law? Yeah, absolutely not being as relevant, definitely. And with natural law, don't forget, because obviously it's an easy jab, it's a low blow really when you just go to natural law is out of date, or modern times, etc. Because at the end of the day, the Catholic Church, one of the wealthiest, if not the wealthiest institution in the world, is formulated by this one guy, Aquinas. All of Aquinas' teachings have influenced the Catholic Church. That's unbelievable. So obviously they are still applying it to modern day life. I think this is the thing, is with ethics, you've got to be careful that just because you don't like the answer doesn't mean the theory isn't useful. There's a big difference there. So even if you work out that natural law, for example, is maybe against homosexuality because you can't promote reproduction, for example, doesn't mean it's not a helpful theory. You just don't like the answer it gives you. So don't forget, you're evaluating the process, not the outcome. And don't forget as well, this is a bit of advice I give to my students, is don't use concrete terms. Don't say natural law is absolutely against homosexuality, because it isn't. You could look in many different ways to do with the application of some different theories. So, for example, extramarital sex, natural law would say that you should only have sex in marriage, but then what about the idea of, I was going to say the Handmaid's Tale there, but obviously that's the extreme version of it. But the idea of the Bible talks about having sex with another person in order to be able to have a baby if you can't conceive yourself. I think it was Abraham with Sarah, potentially. I know me and my students looked into that. I think it's Abraham and Sarah, and he had sex with somebody else. So that would be classed as an extramarital affair. But obviously, if we're going back down the biblical route, then natural law would support that if it's going down the Bible route. So always be careful using concrete terms, because sometimes you can always see ways around applying the information. No, you don't need to necessarily, if you get a question on natural law, for example, you don't necessarily need to give an example. So I'm guessing by example, you mean the application. If, for example, tomorrow you get a question on act versus rule or Bentham, you don't have to talk about business unless it's relevant to what you're saying. You don't need, if it's a question on cant and duty, you don't have to talk about business. If it's situation ethics and the 6 and the 4, you don't have to talk about euthanasia. If it says moral decision making, they always regurgitate that same phrase, moral decision making. Then that kind of means apply it to ethics, apply it to euthanasia, or apply it to business. But no, otherwise, if it just says act versus rule, act is better than rule, discuss, that's all you need to talk about. You don't have to bring in an ethical theory if you don't want to. Sorry if I'm missing any of your questions, folks. How would you compare act versus rule? Well, they're very different, aren't they? So you would maybe structure it as doing the act approach. Don't forget the act of applying the hedonic calculus. He's a strong act, so you must apply the hedonic calculus in every way. He focuses on pleasure. By he, I mean Bentham focuses on pleasure, so every act focuses on pleasure. Whereas obviously Mill, I would do Mill and rule as the second half. So when I'm talking about Bentham being strong, Mill's weak. When I'm talking about Bentham focuses on pleasure for his act, Mill focuses on happiness for his rule. So you just compares, if you keep it nice and simple, I'd always keep the same structure. Start with a name, every paragraph you have the same name, like Bentham, and then you compare with Mill and you compare the similars. So he has the hedonic calculus, he has higher and lower pleasures, etc. Didn't end strong. You don't necessarily lose marks if your third paragraph isn't as strong as your others, as long as your third paragraph is relevant to the question and your line of argument. It doesn't matter if it's not as good as your others. I can go over actual content, but because there's actual content videos, I can't go over 9 topics in an hour. So I won't be going over actual content, but I'll be going over, if you want content for a certain topic, just watch the teach along, where obviously I'll go. I can't do them in enough quality. Sorry, some of these I've already asked as well. The 2024 paper questions, I don't know off the top of my head. Again, there's a YouTube video where I go through all past questions, so just look to the other videos that are available. What would you compare metaethics to? Right, this is an extremely good question. You don't compare metaethics to anything. Metaethics is a standalone topic, like conscience is a standalone topic. You don't compare metaethics to anything. Metaethics is actually, students don't like metaethics. I think it's really good. Metaethics is we are so used to, especially in normative ethics, applying abortion is right, euthanasia is wrong, genetic engineering is right, murder. Do you know what I mean? You're always using these words, but what metaethics says is what do the words actually mean? When you keep using the words good, bad, right, and wrong, what do they actually mean? So it's not interested in the application, it's not interested in the normative approach. You want to know what do they mean. So obviously an ethical naturalist argues that there's certain things that are just factual and true within the world, because there's enough evidence that backs them up as part of naturalism, and so therefore it's ethics because it's about good, bad, right, and wrong. And the naturalism part is it's within our existence, whereas intuitionism is similar to ethical naturalism, but it argues, again, it's fact, but it's fact as a part of your intuition, that you just know what's right, wrong, good, and bad. Like, you just know what yellow is, you know what goodness is. You can't define it, you just know it through intuition. Whereas emotivism just says that it's an emotional reaction. There's no factual basis here. It's just an emotional response. Boo, boo, hooray. That's all it is. So with metaethics, if you get a question on intuitionism, for example, just compare it to one other theory, compare it to emotivism, for example, to say which one's better, or ethical naturalism. You don't have to mention all three, unless the question says something like the word goodness has no meaning in ethics. Then you can do two or all three if you want to. Again, I would never be juggling more than two theories at a time in an essay personally, because you will have enough content and detail and evaluation juggling two. So if it is emotivism, I'd pick one other. If it's intuitionism, I'd pick one other, and that's how I do it. So metaethics is very straightforward, actually, because you use the theories within themselves. Specific questions on CSR, they would just say, they would just say something like businesses do not need to apply corporate social responsibility in order to be ethical, something like that. Again, check the spec from the exam board, because they just take away the bullet points. The questions are all written in the specification, so just Google it. Yeah, Rosie, that would work. So, a question on all sex ethics, you don't need all four. I certainly wouldn't, Alfie. I wouldn't do all four. No. Again, different teachers, different students have different approaches, but I would much rather go into one or two theories in a lot of detail than just do a very blanket of Kant would say this, natural law would say this. I think that's a very blanket approach, but it could work just as well. The six propositions, thank you, Sabina. And the six propositions are most useful part of situation ethics. If you get a question specifically on the six, you still have to mention all the other areas. You just need to link it to the six. So the six would be your structure, but I would still link the six to the four. So after the stream, I advise you to sit down with your six and your four parts of situation ethics and work out which ones are similar, which ones overlap. You still need to talk about agape, but you just have to link it into the six. So basically, that is the structure of your essay, but you still need to bring in everything else. Same with Kant. If you get a question on duty, you still have to talk about the categorical imperative. Duty and the categorical imperative go hand in hand. They're a different side of the same coin. So most parts of ethics, like students struggled with the question when it came up about Aquinas's hierarchy moral code. But that's just the whole of the theory. You would talk about everything still, but you would just link it into which part of the hierarchy it links to. So don't be put off by very specific questions, because it still wants all of the theory. You just need to be very clever with how you word it to show why that part, like the four, are relevant to the six. I hope that makes sense. Ryan, yes, I wouldn't go too much. Freud is always a bit of a minefield, isn't he, for his quirks, but certainly you could talk about how it's very much based on his own experiences, therefore it's biased. You can talk about how, his case studies were, it wasn't, his approach was not scientific. So yes, absolutely. Yeah, Peter Singer, where's the question gone? I wouldn't, Elena, I wouldn't go into massive depth about the psychosexual stages and conscience. Basically, the main part is in the phallic stage. The boy relates to the father and learns his morals from his father. That's kind of the crux of it. Sorry, somebody asked me a question about Peter Singer and I cannot see it now. You can talk about falsification, logical positivism in metaethics, because, but I would do it with an A or emotivism, because obviously he was the one that actually was part of the logical positivists, and he then did. But don't get too bogged down, because religious language is about the philosophy of language. It's about the ethics of language. So don't get too sidetracked. But you can mention how AJA was part of both, and so therefore, because he was Mr. Verification, he's never going to say that ethics are like ethical naturalism. It's never going to argue it's fact. It's always going to be emotion for AJA. Oh, there's back the question. Can Peter Singer be used for a whole paragraph, or would you? Um, I wouldn't do Peter Singer as a whole paragraph, Sophie, if I'm honest. If it's a if it's a euthanasia question on things like quality of life, then you could talk about Peter Singer and preference there. Even that's utilitarianism, because obviously Peter Singer is a massive name when it comes to quality of life. I wouldn't do a big paragraph on him in a utilitarianism answer, however, because he is old spec. So you can mention him, brilliant. He's wider reading, he's wider understanding. You would use him in relation to as a valuation to either towards Bentham or Mill. I wouldn't do a whole paragraph on him. Because again, the question will never specifically ask for him, so therefore you don't want to go off the question. No, Jimmy, I don't think you need to do the distinguish. If you can distinguish, brilliant. If you don't have time, then it's not necessary. How would you possibly end the essay? You end the essay, the critical compare Aquinas and Freud. You end by saying who wins, who is better, Aquinas or Freud, when coming with decisions on conscience. Who is better? Yeah. So, how do we structure? So, if you just want to hold off on your questions a second, so that I don't miss any more, how do you structure an application essay? So, my advice is this: if the question is your structure. If the question says situation ethics with euthanasia, situation ethics is your structure. You start every paragraph with situation ethics. You would break situation ethics down to maybe 2 or 3 main things. 2 or 3 main things you're going to talk about, like agape. You then very briefly outline what agape is. You maybe evaluate agape within its own right. Then you apply it to one part of euthanasia. The trick with application, or certainly what my recommendation is don't be juggling lots of different areas. Stick with a point within situation ethics and then a point within euthanasia, and talk about how they apply. How is it helpful? Does it work? Is it effective? And that's what you evaluate. So for me, situation ethics is quite vague. It's quite idealistic. Agape is all well and good, but in reality, it's very hard to apply. What's the most loving thing to do in a case of euthanasia? Well, it's to help the individual, but it's still against the law in this country. So situation ethics isn't that helpful in that case. So that's what I would discuss. So I would do about situation ethics and agape, apply it to one part of euthanasia, like a case study or sanctity of life, quality of life, evaluate it, and then move on to my next one. That's the easiest way to do application, is by clearly defining your themes, keeping to a very similar structure, and just evaluating whether it can be applied or not. So application can be very straightforward. It's about keeping control. Isabel, there's lots of support on the website for maximising AO2 in your evaluation. The theories are more AO1, your evaluation is your AO2. So theories, whether it's euthanasia or situation, is AO1. The evaluation, how well it can be applied, is your AO2. Yep, Fletcher did mention conscience is a verb. I think that's probably the best part of situation ethics. So you could mention it in a conscience essay if you wanted to. But yeah, I think it's the best part of situation ethics, is the fact that Joseph Fletcher recognised that conscience is not the name of something. It's not a noun. It's a doing word. Conscience is a process of applying ethics correctly, or how you see correctly. So yeah, it's a good link, is that one. Oh, thank you. I'm really pleased that helped after a day at work, and it's always, my brain's always a little bit fried. So I'm pleased that made sense. No, you're not capped if you don't mention scholars. So again, please check out, I've done a number of videos, very shorts on YouTube as well, for how to get the A stars and how to prove your essays. One of the big comments from last year from the examiners' reports was that the examiners don't need what they called a menu of scholars. Basically, students got so bogged down with name after name after name, scholar after scholar after scholar. They didn't actually do anything with them. They didn't go anywhere. So you won't be capped if you don't actually mention scholars. It helps to mention, you know, a couple, but you don't have to. What they want is the arguments. What they want is the viewpoints. So even if you have a view and you can't remember who said it, that is fine. They want the arguments. They want you to do something with the arguments. It's not about dropping in names. You're not, I was going to say some celebrity that loves dropping in, I know this person and this person. No, you're not name dropping. It's about doing something quality with the arguments you've got. I think, Mia, I think it's they like a line of argument in your introduction, which means to make it, I think it's good to make it clear very early on which way you're going with the question, because that's what a line of argument is. So a line of argument is, what are you going to argue? Basically, like I said in the philosophy live stream and my other videos, are you on the defense team or are you on the prosecutor's team? Who are you when you approach? Because it should be very, it should be very blatantly obvious throughout your whole essay, starting with your first paragraph, the first sentence, the first paragraph. It should be clear whether you're going on the attack or the defense. So I certainly would put your line of argument or what you're going to conclude essentially in your introduction, because your conclusion is just a summary of what you've argued to back up the conclusion that you're drawing. It should be clear throughout your essay what it is you're actually arguing. You won't get a question on Fletcher's conscience. No, Fletcher isn't. Fletcher's just a passing comment in conscience. It'll only be Aquinas, Freud, or a general term, umbrella term. Yeah, no problem. So Hume's is ought problem is, so my advice is don't do Hume and G.E. Moore. They both argue the same thing. Hume came up with it first, or he probably copied it from somebody else, but Hume comes before Moore anyway, put it that way. And so Hume's is ought distinction is basically the idea that is statements are factual. Ought statements are how you ought to behave, are ethical. So you cannot say, like an ethical naturalist, Hitler is the leader of the Nazi party. Hitler is a bad man. You can't say that both of those, because of the evidence and the facts, both of those is statements are factual. No, one of them is a factual statement. Hitler is the leader of the Nazi party. The other statement is always to do with ethics and how you ought not behave. Hitler ought not have killed those people. You can never mix ethics with facts. That's basically Hume's is ought distinction. That's it. Yep, absolutely, Phoebe. Yep, that would work well. Hiya, Liv. It actually could mean either. So, it's a very good thing for me to remind you all. And I got a message of someone, actually. I didn't reply to it. I think sure someone else asked me this message. I get so many messages. Is that I would not. If you get a question on euthanasia, you only link it to natural law and situationics. If you get a question on business, you only link it to Kant and utilitarianism. You do not cross-pollinate. So you don't do Kant in euthanasia or natural law in business. No. You wouldn't get necessarily marked down, but it's not on the spec. The examiners in bold, they even put it in bold in the spec. They want Kant and utilitarianism with business. They want natural law and situationics with euthanasia. So, for example, I don't even teach overlaps with my students. We just do them. But whereas sex ethics is a free for all, you can do any theory. So, if the question does ask for situation ethics and moral decision making, you could actually link it to sex ethics if you wanted to. I think students generally link it to euthanasia because it's a bit of an easier one, whereas sex ethics is so massive, but you absolutely could link any of them to sex ethics as well. So yeah, thank you for that, Liv. Oh yeah, absolutely. If you just talk about Kant and the duty of care and euthanasia, lovely, because that actually works as wider reading. It's when students do massive paragraphs on Kant and euthanasia, whereas if you just pass a comment about sanctity of life and how Kant would argue they have a duty of care, and then evaluate that as part of your argument, that would be lovely, because that shows wider understanding rather than I've run out of things for natural law and situation, so I'm just going to talk about another theory as well. Yes, so sex ethics, you could bring in any theory of your choice. Yes, Kant and autonomy, that's clever. That's a very clever link. So I'm guessing you mean autonomy like euthanasia. That's very clever. Hiya, Charlie. Charlie, I don't want to say that I am 100% certain, because after the philosophy exam, I'm not. However, I have never known in all 8, 9 years of them doing this, they're never to ask at least one application. I pretty much am certain they're going to ask at least one application. I think they normally ask two. If you can avoid an application, I sometimes say avoid application if you can, which is why the examiners often ask two, so you can't avoid an application. Why do they want you to do an application? Because they're harder. Talking about natural laws for tiers of law, that's easy. Because talking about natural law with euthanasia, that's much, much harder, because you're juggling two topics. So, yeah, I would pretty much guarantee I will be flabbergasted if they don't ask one application tomorrow. But after philosophy, I'm going to have my seat ready to fall over to. So, yeah, thank you for that, Charlie. Is an applied question on euthanasia, not just the topic. So, thank you, Alfie. With the assess the view that situation this is helpful in moral decision making, you can do it as very generalised, whether it does or doesn't work in moral decision making. A lot of students do prefer, though, rather than making it vague on just general moral decision making, they do like to actually apply it. It makes you don't have to, but it makes your answers a little bit more. Your argument flows a little bit easier if you actually do apply it to an actual moral decision making situation. Usefulness just is another word meaning better. Is it more useful? Is it easier to apply? Is it a better theory? So natural law is more useful than situation ethics. Is it more helpful in helping you make a decision about the ethical situation, if you should or shouldn't do it? Um, Thank you. How do you approach business ethics questions? It's a bit of a I would check out the support video, because business ethics is basically on themes. So you would talk about corporate social responsibility, the responsibility of companies to looking at things like the environment, its shareholders, its stakeholders. You could talk about the rights of an employee, the rights of a consumer. You can talk about whistleblowing, sweatshops, globalization. So business ethics is about the themes within business, and you would just pick two or three of those themes unless the question actually specifies a theme. How would you structure a critically compare? So you would just pick again two to three themes. So, for example, Aquinas and Freud both talk about guilt. You would talk about what each of their approaches are and which one is better. So you'd evaluate them. If you think that both are not very good, always do it to an extent. So, to an extent, which one still might be slightly better. You can do the trolley problem for things like euthanasia, but that's just a general point. That's just a general evaluation point. I wouldn't class that as my. I mean, it would be a moral decision making if you've got the trolley problem. Who would you put the brakes on for, etc. So you could do that. You don't have to necessarily mention an application theory. The only thing is that I always say is that the examiners have actually mentioned the application theories. They've not mentioned the trolley So the trolley would be wider reading, but I wouldn't do the wider understanding at at the expense of maybe mentioning it, even in passing, a link to the euthanasia or business, etc. So you could do it, but I would do it as well as. Yeah, we'll be back doing this for DCT on Thursday. So at least after this week, it's nearly done. General predictions not sure for what? Life. Yeah, for predictions for what? Last year's ethics, Tom, just again look to the video on YouTube. I've done a whole video on the past questions and gaps. Does Mill's harm principle avoid all criticism in business ethics of exploitation? Does it avoid all criticism? I guess the harm principle is a very, very good theory where you obviously look to the harm it's caused. So even if lots of people are getting happiness, if one person's harm excels that, I think the harm principle is maybe the weakness of the harm principle is, again, it's the who's applying it. It's quite subjective. What does it mean by harm? Looking at things like exploitation sweatshops, they're still got a job, they're still getting paid, they're not on the streets, they're not being trafficked. So I guess it depends. That with the weakness of it is, it depends who's applying it and what your understanding of harm is. But overall, it's a very solid theory. No, strong rule utilitarianism is teleological. All utilitarianism is teleological. They could ask you, Lucy, they normally ask it for sex ethics, but they could ask you to compare natural law and situation ethics to euthanasia. They could ask you three topics in one. Yeah. Again, it's not common. I can't really recall a year they have done it, but again, it's not beyond their possibility. Yeah, strong and weak, of course. Strong and weak utilitarianism. Strong was it rule? Strong rule utilitarianism is basically like zero tolerance. You apply the rule to every situation, regardless. Don't forget, rule utilitarian. We're a rule utilitarian country. We're quite a strong rule utilitarian country in that when you apply rules, those rules stand. If you murder somebody, you murder them. However, you could also see as a bit of a weak rule in the extreme situations, they will bend the rules or the rules can change. So the strong rule approach is zero tolerance. You've murdered somebody, that's it. Weak rule would be yes, but it was self-defense, therefore it's a different situation. So strong and weak just means how you applied the rule. And it's the same with ACT. So Mill is a weak rule because he believes in extreme situations the rules need to change, whereas Bentham is a strong act. He believes every single act you should apply the hedonic calculus without exception. Yeah, you could talk about women's rights. Just don't go too much, Nick. Don't go too much down a gender question because that's coming up at the end of the week. Yes, active versus passive is the same as medical intervention and non-medical intervention. That was what I was trying to remember earlier, was it, Rosie? So medical intervention is they actually medically intervene to end your life, which is active. Medical non-intervention means that they are not giving you chemotherapy, radiation, heart transplant, whatever it might be. And so therefore that would be a passive. So yeah. Yep, they can ask two questions on the same topic. So they could ask you a euthanasia and they could ask you a situation ethics and moral decision making. So yes. No, weak rule. Well, I guess as far as looking at an act, therefore to see if it's extreme, yes, but it's nothing like Bentham's act, because obviously a rule utilitarian wouldn't apply the hedonic calculus. If I do miss any of your questions, please do add them to one of the posts later and I'll try and respond. I always appreciate all of your questions, and obviously it's quite hard to answer all of them. Oh, what's my favourite topic to teach? In ethics. Oh, that's quite whereas I love nature of God for philosophy. I love the gender questions for DCT. I'm person of Jesus. I know I'm very strange. I love the person of Jesus topic. I think that's a great topic. And Bonhoeffer. For ethics, I like Kant. Please don't throw things at your screen. I do like Kantian ethics, and I always like teaching utilitarianism, talking about Bentham in his box being taxidermied, etc. So yeah, I'd say Kant and utilitarianism. Oh, and I love business as well. Business ethics, I think, is great. So yeah, please don't dislike me because of my choice of ethical theories. Oh, good. I'm glad I'm not the only one, Mia. We have some Kant appreciation in here. That's good. I'm pleased people like the topics. Don't unsubscribe me, Liv. Yeah, definitely. You keep preaching, Liv. Oh, I'll have words with you tomorrow, Liv. It's impossible to measure pleasure. Evaluate act versus rule. That you've kind of merged two areas there. It's impossible to measure pleasure. That would be a Bentham isn't as good as Mill. So that would be pleasure versus happiness, hedonism versus higher and lower pleasures. Act versus rule would be a different question, I think. I don't think they would merge the questions because it would make it quite tricky to decipher. You never know, it's OCR. But yeah, I think impossible to measure pleasure is a critique of Bentham, whereas it would be a much clearer act versus rule question. Oh, yeah, no problem at all. So the difference between hypothetical and categorical. So Kant's main focus is categorical. This links with duty. It's what you absolutely must do. Hypothetical, Kant got to a point where people were going, so if I do this, is this a categorical imperative? And he's going, no, that's a hypothetical. So he presents the hypothetical to help explain what isn't a categorical. And so a hypothetical always involves an if. If you want to achieve something else, you have to do this. So it could be something to do with nothing to do with ethics. So if I want to go on holiday, I must save up. If I'm hungry, I must eat something. If I want to pass my exam tomorrow, I must revise. That's a hypothetical. It's only based on if you want the outcome. So it's teleological, it's not ethical, and also it's not absolute. So therefore, Kant did not agree with it, did not like it, and he used it as a comparison to say, this is why you should do the categorical instead. It's clear, it's factual, it's specific. So that's the difference. I don't know who was a racist. Alpha, you could certainly go down that route because you're wanting situations with inheritance, but obviously, again, that's the rock and the hard place. There's a case study that I do, more Alchemare case, something like that. It's on the PowerPoint, about the old lady that she had a terminal illness and basically she just wanted to be euthanized. It's I think it was the first case that really made it legalized in Switzerland. And she just decided, she thought it's much easier for my family. I don't want to be a burden, and so it's a rocky road though, looking at inheritance, because again, that's the difficulty with situation. It is, whose agape are you looking at? Is it genuinely in their best interest, or are you just wanting the money? So it would make a very good discussion area, definitely. Thank you, Sabina. Yeah. Doctrine of double effect is basically the idea that you have to have, and there's no tricking God, you have to have a genuine good intention. So even if you can predict a potential bad outcome, that outcome is unavoidable, but you can predict it, you can still do what you believe is the right thing. So, for example, for euthanasia, a doctor gives a large amount of morphine. He is doing the right thing. His intention is genuine. It is not to kill, euthanize the person, it's to help alleviate their pain. That is a genuine reason. But the predicted bad outcome is that large amounts of morphine might kill them, but this is an undesired side effect. That is the doctrine of double effect, that even though the person has now died, your intentions were genuine. It's not a, well, I'll say that it's cause of pain, but actually it's so we euthanize them. No, because God knows the genuine reasons. It has to be genuinely that you think it's the right thing to do, not because you actually just want a loophole to go around the law. If it does no decision making, just you don't have to automatically apply it. Some students find it easier to apply it though. Sabina, I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. That was one of the first comments I ever got posted on any video, was that I'm the best thing about Yorkshire. Yeah, people call me the Yorkshire lady, the Yorkshire teacher. Oh, that's good. Henry just rewatched the earlier part. I went through the meta-ethics very quickly. The meta-ethics term, basically, they'll make it a bit clearer in the question, but it's that conscience actually isn't really a religious idea. It's just a term that people use that's very much a cultural or environmental phrase. It's a much more Freud approach, because obviously Freud puts it down to parents and upbringing and environment. So it's removing it from the Christian God elements. That's basically what the umbrella term is wanting you. Most conscience questions are still wanting Aquinas versus Freud. Yeah, Rob, I understand that. Yeah, it'll be nice. It'll be all done this week. Tom, again, check out the video on YouTube for the ethics from last year, 'cause I can't remember off the top of my head. Barth could, yeah, if you're meaning that Barth talks about focusing on reason, I'm guessing you mean Barth rather than focusing on reason rather than love. I'm guessing that's what you're. Thank you, Georgia. I'm guessing that's what you mean. Sorry, I only have about 8 minutes left, Ellie. So I just you only need to watch the first 5 minutes of the conscience video, and it'll go over Aquinas. Again, Sophia, check out the predictions video, because I go over some possible conscience questions. I wouldn't apply sex ethics to euthanasia. No, they're not. They're not related. Intent, Alfie, thank you. Intent, situation H doesn't really care about how you get there, as long as the end outcome is the most love. Hence why Joseph Fletcher's examples are actually very interesting. Joseph Fletcher, I don't know if you've come across them, so just quickly Google them afterwards, but he gives some very extreme examples to show how situation X can work. So, for example, the lady that's in a prisoner of war camp is married and has children on the outside, has sex with one of the prison guards to get pregnant so that she's released. That's an extreme situation, but Joseph Fletcher said even though you have to cheat on your husband to get pregnant by another man, the end outcome is you still get to go back to your family, your husband and your children, so therefore it's the right thing to do. So yeah, the intent for him, it's all about the end outcome being agape. Yeah, so Aquinas does see it as an umbrella term, but certainly if it's based more, it depends if the umbrella term is linked to things like environment. Obviously, Aquinas still talks about the God element within the environment. But yes, you are right there. Yeah, conscience just on Freud, correct. Yeah, that has been asked in the past. I think the questions have on conscience have been one specifically on Aquinas and one specifically on Freud. I think the last question on conscience was actually Freud and Aquinas compare. Right, last 5 minutes, folks. So any other Yeah, they could ask you to compare two ethical theories, but it'll not by themselves, though. It'll always be in relation to an application, I would say. Current conflicts, definitely, if it's relevant to what you're talking about. So again, Israel Palestine is more of the problem of evil, whereas if there is relevant things, so for example, there's a lot of newspapers about Uganda and homosexuality, that's relevant. So definitely real life case studies, definitely what's going on in the world, but only related to the areas that you wanted to talk about, unless it's moral decision making, and then you could apply can and duty to something like that. Just again, case studies or real life cases, do it quickly. Have I started marking for the exams? No, I'm not marking for the exam board this year because I do criminology, and criminology has a lot of marking. No, I just do these instead. I just talk to you guys, so no, I don't do marking anymore for the exam board. What other tricky questions could they ask? That's a really good question. I have no idea. Um, I would never have thought they would have asked the questions like they did in philosophy. So, as far as what tricky questions could they ask, um, for me, ethics is quite straightforward. It's all in the spec. Um, but if they're anything like the philosophy questions, they'll find something that we're not expecting. Hopefully not. No, no, Sarah, absolutely not. They will never, you are not to talk about and overlap your natural law with business. No, the two with the one, the two with the one. So utilitarianism can't, business, natural law, situation ethics, euthanasia, sex can go to any of them. Yeah, I do hope, Henry. I do hope they're at least nicer questions. Ethics is hard enough. You don't want really tricky worded questions. Grammar, as long as they can read your sentences. So as long as you use some full stops, they don't mark you down for grammar as long as they can actually understand what it is you're saying. Um, Isabel, no, they don't have different grade boundaries as far as I know, but the examiners expect more for certain answers. So other questions that certainly the harder questions, they're more giving with different avenues. But ethics, usually they're fairly giving to lots of different areas. Ellie, if you can avoid application, I think application are the hardest. I think sex ethics questions are really hard because you have to actually know about homosexuality as far as what's going on in the world, statistics, case studies. I think that if you can stick with just doing one application in your answer, I think application are the hardest to do. Whereas I would much rather do a meta ethics on its own or a conscience on its own than trying to juggle two theories together. I think they're the hardest ones, definitely. Grade boundaries are overall. So each of them, you'll get an overall mark for each of your papers, and then a grade is given for it all overall. Right, folks, only a couple more minutes. No, conscience is completely on its own. Meta ethics, conscience, totally standalone. No application necessary. You can structure ethics similar to philosophy, but you can also structure them quite differently. Philosophy, I think, is much more regimented with the different kind of AO1 that you need to mention. Whereas I think ethics, there's a lot more freedom as long as you keep control of what you're juggling. But I think a compare in philosophy is very similar to an application in ethics. Could they ask two euthanasia? Jimmy, they could. I think they'd be flipping mean if they did. So yeah, they can. They never have before. But I said that for philosophy. I very, very much doubt it though. Um, I think euthanasia is very likely, business less likely, but still possible. What should we cut out if you don't have time to revise everything? Well, first of all, I'd say go on to the BBC News and see what's happening to with euthanasia, business, and sex ethics, so that you have a specific example for each. That's going to get you a long way. I'd say euthanasia is more important than business. I think utilitarianism and situational ethics are more important than natural law. I think conscience is more important than meta ethics, but I think it also could be any of them. Thank you, George. You're very kind. You're very welcome, Alfie. Grace, again, they've not done it before where they've asked all 3 second years in one paper. They could. Again, OCR can do anything they want. They could ask you a conscience, a meta, and a sex ethics. Yes. And then like a euthanasia with situation ethics. Yeah. Oh, you're very, very welcome. You're very welcome, everyone. Yeah, at least OCR give us a choice. Some exam boards, you have to do the questions they ask and there's no choice. At least OCR gives us a choice. Hold on to that. If you want to leave out meta ethics, that is your choice. But again, they might throw it in there. And I think meta is easier than an application. If the question says moral decision making, then that means business or euthanasia if you wanted to. Yeah, absolutely, Rose. I think that's a good argument. And don't forget the idea of a gift from God. It's a gift. You can return a gift. A gift is not a burden. A gift is not a curse. If you're given a gift like some socks at Christmas, you can take them back. If God has given us the gift of life, you should be able to do what you want with that gift. You shouldn't have to suffer unbelievable pain because God gave it as a gift. So, yeah, that would definitely be an argument that would work. All right, folks, you know I could keep talking all night. So please, if you do have any other burning questions, just message me on any video on this video. And I will try and respond tonight once I've had my tea. And I'll try and respond. Otherwise, I'll be thinking of you tomorrow and praying that the questions are not like philosophy. But we still did well in philosophy, but we're going to smash this one. We are going to do so well in this exam tomorrow. And then we've got one left to go. So I'll see you this time on Thursday evening as well for the final round of DCT. So have a good night, everyone. You're very, very welcome. So yeah, I'm really pleased that I'm able to help. So I'll see some of you tomorrow in lesson and we'll try and smash through the last few final things. I always feel exam jitters with you all as well. But just show off, do your best. And yeah, we're nearly there. So enjoy the rest of your evening, everyone. Bye for now.